Okay, and we're live. Hey guys, it's Mitch Brisker, and this is Scientology, the Big Lie. Welcome back, and if you're new here, welcome. Today we're going to talk about Narconon. I'm going to read chapter 23 from Scientology, the Big Lie. It's a very much an insider's look at the reboot of Narconon that I was intimately involved with, and it intersects and has trajectories and all kinds of other things about Scientology. So stick around. You're really going to like this.
If you fail to understand, then the same incredible terror that's menacing me will strike at you!
Okay, good. So we're going to just tread water here for a little bit. I'll wait for some folks to gather. And if not, it doesn't matter. They'll see it on the replay. Okay, so here's the deal. What exactly is Narconon? Well, Narconon is a drug rehabilitation program that has a very interesting past, which Scientology has very much tried to bury. Hey, Paralyzed to Paralyze. Good to see you. Got a thumbs up on you guys can hear me okay? You know, I'm still freaking out about having that problem the other day. So just let me know if there's any issues with the sound or anything before I get started. And Astana is here, rhymes with Donna. So I had God, there was something I wanted to tell you guys and I forgot about. Oh, let me see if I can find this. Yes, okay, great. Thanks a lot. Appreciate that. Paralyzed says, yeah, I sound great. Okay, good. BOC buddy, hi, thanks for showing up. We're going to try to get through this whole chapter today. It's a really long one, and I have an out later, and I got to be somewhere. And so we'll try to get through as much of it as possible. But, you know, yesterday we were talking about, let me just grab something here. Yesterday we were talking about superpower, and we were talking about color deprivation. I meant to grab this ahead of time and I didn't. And I wanted to just show you guys a photo of the environment that I was referring to. Oh, there it is. See if you can see this. So let me go back here and I'm just going to share this just to give you an idea. You can give me a comment in the chat if you think my description of it was at all. Yeah, so hold on. If my description fitted, here we go. So, okay, there it is. Can y'all see that? So that's the soft lighting and the blue and, you know, blue tones and glass. And you can see there's not a lot of color in there. There's really just a couple of colors. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. And let me see. Hey, degraded daughter, I sent that email off. Hopefully I'll get an answer and I'll let you know. Yeah, Mitch is angry. Biden didn't pardon me. Yeah, he didn't say pardon me. So no, it's like whatever. Yeah, I'm not really all that. Yeah, exactly. Stada. It's very sterile. So let me see. Well, I'm not even going to tell you about it because let me just, I got my book open. Okay, let me just share it and then we'll get going. Okay, share screen. No. There it is. Okay, good. Okay, this is good. Hey, Tess, thank you so much. I really appreciate your showing up. She's Tess TVG Scribe says, hey, Mitch, able to make yet another live stream. It's 2 in a row. Yeah, great, because you're going to want to see these. Yeah, I appreciate that, degraded daughter, but you don't need to stick up for me. I'm actually not, but I appreciate you doing so. I'm actually not using moderators. If somebody wants to come in here and be a douche, go ahead, take your best shot. Maybe when my channel gets bigger, I used to have mods, but right now, for the sake of free speech, if somebody wants to come in here, obviously, if you're just a bomb thrower, I'm going to just, you know, take a beat and cut you out of here. But other than that, you're free to say whatever you want. So paralyze to paralyze says power lies to paralyze. Uh, can we just call you PLP for short? I'm researching the color deprivation reaction. When I get my notes together, I'll forward them to you to see what resonates. Yeah, for sure. Let's do that. And then I'll present it on screen and we'll on a stream and we'll talk about it. So let me just jump over to my book and we're going to get started because, okay, so here we go. So this is chapter 23 and this is Narconon Redux. And no, I don't have a beagle because Hubbard had beagles in and Miscavige had beagles and now Narconon has beagles and we'll get into that. It's really random that I have a beagle, but he's a great guy. This little picture, if you can see it, of the drug sniffing beagle looks an awful lot like my dog. So here we go. Chapter 23, Narconon Redux. I don't remember the exact year David Miscavige left the international base, setting up shop at Author Services, Inc. in Hollywood. I don't know if you guys know where it is. I have pictures of it. So I'm going to do a stream about that shortly, but it's on Hollywood Boulevard. It's near Hollywood and La Brea. At Author Services Inc. Hollywood, never to return to the base again. But this is like, you could say at this point it's speculation because I haven't been up there since I think early 2020 was the last time I was up there. But as far as I know, he's never going back. But in a one-on-one conversation, he made it clear that he was fed up with all the people at the base who had, as he put it, effed me over, and who he never wanted to see again. I assume he was mainly referring to the 100 or so executives he'd held captive in the hole, the ones that hadn't escaped. Personally, I thought he feared the day when one or more of the detainees might get violent and take him out. But it was certainly before 2014 that he vacated the international base, leaving behind the $50 million office building he'd supervised as the plush headquarters for his relatively small staff. I recall he hadn't been at the base in some time when I received an urgent request to meet him at Author Services to go over plans for reinventing the Narconon drug rehabilitation program. If you've been following along with some of these chapters, I would get these calls like, yeah, I come down here right now. This thing's a disaster. You need to fix it. Okay, the request came via my friend and writing partner, Timothy Jones. I'm using a fictitious name for privacy reasons. Timothy is deeply embedded within Scientology's reality distortion field, and I have no reason to call him out. I was just, and by the way, Timothy Jones, if any of you did Scientology training, that's the name of the character who is audited in the film Confessional TRs, which is about, it's about how to give a confessional, which is also pretty much how to give a sex check. It's about security checking. They don't even do confessionals much anymore because at the end of it, they have to say you are forgiven for anything that you honestly said. But that's why they don't do it. They don't want to forgive people. They want to punish them because they're very much a punishment based. Hey, Tony Hoban, good to see you again. I'm not putting comments up right now because I'm in the middle of the book. So here we go. Or I've started reading. Okay, so Timothy appeared breathless and energized, saying, "We're going to LA. The boss wants to meet." He was all excited. Like any excuse to leave Gold was welcome, especially when it meant being closer to home at the end of a work week. I think this was like a Friday. And an invitation to meet with Miscavige was particularly welcome. Keep in mind that despite a few rough conversations we'd had over the years, things between Miscavige and me were generally pretty chill. I always thought he made sure to keep it that way because it meant a higher likelihood I'd defend him if called upon to do so. And of course, if something having to do with film or media blew up, he could always count on me to solve it. Yeah, and there was also one of his favorite tropes was pointing to crew and when I was standing there and saying I had to hire this guy because you MFers couldn't do your job. And it makes you feel so good when somebody says that. When you're triangulated into a sort of hate bomb thrown at other people, it's really like it wears you down. It may not sound serious, but it really wears you down. Okay, so all film production at the international base must be part of a plan that is approved by David Miscavige. So when he says he doesn't run things day to day, that is completely a lie. Everything that gets done of any note has to be presented to him, proposed to him, and it needs to have approval From this arises the often heard phrase approved planning. Like this carried some weight at the base in terms of, especially with films and audio stuff. This is once something's approved planning, that's like carte blanche to get it done. And in terms of also, I meant to say, in terms of him going back to the base and saying that he was leaving because so many people effed him over, I have to say that Mike Rinder also mentioned to me later after I published the book that he was worried about an FBI raid because of the whole, and that makes a lot of sense. So for the prior 6 months or so, Gold had been producing a series of films to be included in an update of the Narconon program. What followed is pretty much an anatomy of a major production fuck-up in the cine division of Golden Era Productions. To be specific, we were producing films that were assumed to have been approved at some planning stage, but were later discovered not what was wanted. How big the disaster was when the fuck-ups was discovered depended entirely on Miscavige's mood. Narconon is run under the auspices of the Association for Better Living and Education, otherwise known as ABLE. It comprises 4 Scientology-sponsored social betterment programs: Applied Scholastics, Scientology Secular Outreach, the aims to export its educational tools to schools, Criminon, the church-sponsored rehabilitation program for prison inmates, the Narconon Drug Rehabilitation Program, and the Way to Happiness Foundation, dedicated to disseminating Hubbard's non-religious moral code of conduct. The other front group would be Citizens Commission on Human Rights. It's not part of ABLE. It's like separate. It's its own thing. These organizations were originally established by the old Guardian's Office. That was the precursor to the clown car known as the Office of Special Affairs. But they're the ones that yeah. I saw this. I'm going to put this up. Adam Carmona said Miscavige makes people salute his beagles. Yeah, some people he did that too. Those dogs, by the way, since you brought it up, I've been attacked by a dog twice. Once when I was about 8 years old. We had a really nasty Cocker Spaniel down the street, and got out one day and it bit me in the upper thigh, shall we say. And the only other time I was attacked was by Miscavige's dogs, because where I lived at Gold in this little cottage, it was next to a gated little green area. It was a rose garden, and the dogs would often be in there. And I think there were 5 of them. And I think he just abandoned them and left them up at Gold. But I walked in there one day, because I walked in there all the time to just take walks. And sorry, I got distracted. We'll get to the comments later. And I had an expensive pair of jeans, like just ripped up. I was just, somebody had to come. A housekeeper was walking the dogs, ran out and grabbed the dogs. But I was like, these dogs are like mean. I think I might talk about that in here, because, I have a beagle, and I got to tell you, it's like, mean dog owners, have mean dogs. It's just a fact. So anyway, but yeah, he not only did he make some people salute his dog, but he had like a shirt, like this tight form-fitting shirt, like he wore with the short sleeve with the 4 bars on it, the captain's insignia or designation. And he would put that on the dog, and the dog that's why you had to salute the dog, because the dog was a captain. But I was never asked to salute one of the dogs. But boy, I mean, he would send, if the dog growled at certain people, he'd send them to ethics. It was just crazy. So let me just, okay, so these organizations were originally established and run by the old Guardian's Office, which Miscavige disbanded after Operation Snow White. These social betterment programs were specifically run so that the church could point to its good acts. They are essentially puff PR piece generating do-gooder machines. ABLE International, the governing body over the 4 programs, was once a strictly secular organization staffed by public Scientologists under the auspices of the Church of Scientology International. Remember, they're one of the 3 corporations that Hubbard set up to kind of try to, keep anybody from taking over. That really went well. Miscavige restructured Able International so that it is staffed solely by Sea Org only members, while the individual programs remain staffed by non-Sea Org Scientologists. Like if you go to the Way to Happiness Foundation in Glendale, California, you go in there, um, it's a bunch of public Scientologists who they're like, I don't even know if they sign a contract, but they go to work for the Way to Happiness. But at the headquarters on Hollywood Boulevard, which is next door to Author Services in a building that used to be owned by the Screen Actors Guild, a beautiful building. I forgot. I have pictures from when something happened later in this. I'll have to find the pictures and I'll put them on the beginning next time. We'll take a look at them. Okay, so Able International, located on Hollywood Boulevard in a building that was once the headquarters of the Screen Actors Guild, I got to stop getting ahead of myself, happens to be conveniently located next door to ASI. After leaving the international base, Miscavige took up residence at the El Cadiz Apartments on Sycamore Avenue, located directly behind ASI. The church had purchased the building. Just like fun fact, a little bit of film trivia. The El Cadiz Apartments, where he lives, and you can Google it. I was going to get some pictures, but it's just ELCADIZ. It's on Sycamore. It's in Hollywood. You can take a look at it. I have some, I'll show them next time. I was in Hollywood and I was looking at a residence and I was like, oh my God, I'm on Sycamore. And so I walked over there. I took some video. I waved to the cameras. And Miscavige wasn't there that day. You could tell because there were no armed guards at the garage entrance. But I'll show you the videos next time I get back to my stuff. I can pull it up. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Okay, good. Security, and if you want to protest, I would like to organize a demonstration at the because you've got right on Hollywood Boulevard, you've got Author Services, and right behind it, you've got Miscavige's residence, and there's if you understand the sort of rhythm about how the events work and so forth, you can kind of predict when he's in town, and I think that would really, and I know OSA's listening, and they're probably writing a report right now, but they're not going to tell him about it because in Scientology, especially in the Sea Org, you're not supposed to tell your senior when something bad happens. You're supposed to handle it, and then tell them that you handle it. Because if you just tell them, oh, by the way, we have a public by the name of Danny Masterson, and he's being accused by another one of our public of SA. If you just report that, to up the line, you're just going to get nuked for it because you're like, well, what are you doing about it? So there's policy especially in the Sea Org that about what your executives want, and they don't want to know that you have a freaking problem that you should be handling. So that's why bringing it closer to him, like where his office is, where he lives, would actually be very effective, especially when he's going to have to show up for that lawsuit at some point, and which I believe is in LA. No, the one with Gavin Potter, the ship Reg, the recruiter who was recruiting attractive young girls as he was kind of like a marriage broker in the Sea Org. He was finding these young girls and bringing in, so older dudes would have young girls to SA and marry. Okay, so Dreamscape, before we go on, I will handle this one. Dreamscape said, what is ASI, please? Very sorry about that. I had described it in the earlier chapter, but I should do it again right here. So let me bring this back up. So ASI stands for Author Services Incorporated, and it is known as L. Ron Hubbard's literary agent. They handle all of the fiction works, like the dime novels, those ponderously boring science fiction epics, pot boilers that he wrote. They handle all that stuff. So in that sense, they're a for-profit business. So all the Sea Org members that work there, they sort of renounce their Sea Org membership. It's just for show. They're just the staff there. I'm going to be talking to you later, maybe tomorrow, about a particular person who works there, has worked there for years. I know this for a fact because when I was working out of there for a year and a half, I had dinner with them 5 nights a week, and they are currently being held captive, as far as I know. The last I heard, in the 4th floor, they've turned it into kind of a prison. So that's what it is. Also, ASI is responsible um, for getting donations, getting Scientologists to donate to what's called the Preservation Project. And so they're sort of the front end money. They're the money flow for that whole project, which Blow Drill knows more about than I do. But even though that I've worked on it, but I've never been to one of those places. So anyway, let's get back. So that's what ASI is. Also, David Miscavige, this was his launching pad to power, because he used to be the chairman of the board of ASI. It was from that position that he did his relatively bloodless coup and took over RTC, and then from there was able to take over the main corporate entities, Church of Scientology, CST, and RTC. Well, he became chairman of the board of RTC, but then also other services, which for some reason I didn't include it in the corporate structure. I don't think it was part of the original corporate structure that Hubbard set up to keep any one person from gaining control. But Blow Drill might know a little about that, whether it was part of that corporate structure or which is probably it wasn't, because they're all nonprofit or they're all like religious, and ASI Author Services is not. It's a very plush, I think it's a 5-story building on Hollywood and Sycamore. It's tricked out inside to the nines. It's just all wood paneling and long custom marble conference. I mean, it's just opulent inside there. Okay, so here we go. After leaving the international base, Miscavige took up residence at the El Cadiz apartments on Sycamore Avenue, located directly behind ASI. The church had purchased the building for his use and had constructed a secret tunnel so he could travel undetected between the El Cadiz and ASI. So then he would have access through the parking lot to go up to his office at ASI, or just next door to Able, where a lot of this story I'm going to tell you takes place. Security at ASI was tight. There was the usual complement of a couple of Sea Org security guards in uniforms that resembled rent-a-cops, as well as 2 or 3 private security guards who could pass for ex-special forces. The type who'd returned to Iraq as independent contractors, and then took work with a private security firm that contracted with the church. I believe these guys worked for Talon. I did not know about Talon when I was writing this or when I was working for them. But yeah, they must have been. They favored tactical cargo pants and military-style desert boots. They were friendly enough, but no small talk ever. Yeah, I mean, if you try to talk to these guys, they were like, kind of like the guards at Buckingham Palace. They didn't want them talking to anybody. So when you arrived at the ASI parking structure, and keep in mind that Sea Org members generally don't have cars, so you have maybe 3 or 4 levels of parking, and maybe 20 cars, including 3 or 4 of Miscavige's, 7 Series BMWs, or he had this custom Mustang that the guys at Flag bought him. I think it cost about $150,000. It's like a hot rodded Mustang, or maybe Tom gave it to him. I think Tom gives him cars because, Tom gets, Miscavige told me Tom gets free cars from BMW because the Mission Impossible franchise has a deal, product placement deal with BMW. And because I remember he said to me one day, he said, "Hey, Tom just got a pair of 850i BMWs. And if you want to borrow one for the weekend." And I was like, I didn't, I was just like, that seemed like a lot, but I always assumed for that. Then he shows up, his personal car is like this big black 7 Series BMW, and it has New Jersey plates. New Jersey would be the port of entry for BMW. That's their port of entry. So if he's driving a BMW with a New Jersey license plate, it probably came directly from the manufacturer to Cruz, who then would toss him the keys, because he's his bro. I mean, I would, if my bro was getting like, free BMWs all the time, I would be like, dude, where's mine? Toss me one. So Anyway, he has like a celebrity lifestyle. And because, I've talked about this, he and Miscavige, Tom and Miscavige, they mirror one another. I knew them both over the years. I saw the whole thing evolve as Tom became more and more strident, more and more like a cult leader. And then Dave became more and more like a celebrity, flying in private jets and wearing like expensive handmade clothes and no more Sea Org uniforms. It's pretty interesting if you want to see a real psychological demonstration of this kind of what's called mirroring, which is something that narcissists do and psychopaths do. They mirror another person, sometimes to abuse them, sometimes just because they don't really have a good image of self. Okay, so that's it for the guards. So if there was, when you arrived at the ASI parking structure, if there was a desert boot wearing Glock carrying private security guard on duty at the gate, then you knew Miscavige was in the house. When Timothy and I pulled up, the private security guard pushed the intercom button to let the receptionist know to open the gate. We were instructed to park and head over to the Able conference room next door. The first leg of the meeting was just Miscavige, Timothy, and me. He was in a pretty good mood. The agenda was a briefing on the recent Narconon fiasco. Narconon had been under intense fire in the media. On July 24th, 2012, the Oklahoman, an online news service, reported on deaths at Narconon Arrowhead, Narconon's flagship training facility in Oklahoma. The story said, after the death of 20-year-old Stacy Dawn Murphy at a Church of Scientology-backed rehab program in Pittsburgh County, the state enacted a new law to provide more oversight of drug and alcohol rehabilitation centers. However, Narconon Arrowhead, where Murphy and 3 other clients died, continues to operate legally because the law allows only limited supervision from the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. I am very surprised they are still open. I am sure, said Gary Richardson, a Tulsa attorney who represents former Narconon Arrowhead clients and their parents, including Murphy's parents, in nearly a dozen lawsuits against Narconon. Murphy had just returned to the center after a brief home visit. According to Sheriff Joel Kearns, it appeared she brought back with her prescription drugs that she did not have a prescription for. Staying true to his vulgar way of framing a conversation, Miscavige's version of the story had Murphy returning from a weekend pass with a condom containing, well, I'm not going to say the drug, but it begins with an H, stuff up her. I'm not going to say the word, but it starts with a C and rhymes with pooch. That's the word he used. He did not mention that she'd been left unattended for 2 hours in the withdrawal section of the facility when, tragically, she died of an overdose. The church was being sued because Narconon never explicitly stated anywhere in its policies that smuggling drugs into the facility was forbidden. In other words, Murphy hadn't broken any rules, and Narconon was being sued for having failed to look after her well-being. According to Miscavige's always blame the victim point of view, in Murphy's case, the lawsuit was due to her greedy parents looking for a payday. Yeah, it was really disgusting. I just sidebar, drug rehab is a dangerous business. Healthcare to some degree is a dangerous business. It's the reason doctors carry so much insurance. The best numbers I could find, I think, was 2005, maybe later than that. The number of deaths in U.S. Drug rehabs, 1,300 people that year died in drug rehab. So a lot of people die in drug rehab. Narconon just has more of its share than of those 1,300 deaths. So Miscavige was intent on exposing any vulnerability in the Narconon program, its policies and procedures, anything that might have contributed to their being held liable for the deaths of clients in Narconon's care, and to revise the program so they could never be sued due to a client's death. So now you got to track with this, because none of this was about, we need to make the place safer because we've had people dying. No, we need to proof ourselves against lawsuits when people die. That was his only concern. Tony Hoban said, I just happened to catch this. Yeah, so I'm just going to put this up real quick. Tony Hoban said, didn't the one in Georgia get shut down around that time? I don't know. I actually don't know. I know there was one in not that far from Gold that I believe got shut down. Uh, so let me just get back to this. Okay, here we go. Never be sued again. Okay, good. Da, 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 da. According to Miscavige, the Narconon program had been kludged together over the previous decades, and it was time for a full revamp. This is actually true. It was kludged together. Just let me read on. It was just like a lot of different people stuck all kind. It was like a pinata. You know, everybody that had a a thing they wanted to push, they just shoved it in there. Like the purification program got shoved in there. That was never originally part of it. Okay, so the program originally began in a California prison when addict and convicted felon William Benitez read Hubbard's The Fundamentals of Thought and was inspired to create a drug rehab program based on Hubbard's description of core human abilities. That's a basic book, Fundamentals of Thought. It's a very, what's the word? It's a very seductive uh, compilation of a lot of great ideas from other philosophies and religions and thinkers. And you read this and you get this idea from it that Scientology is a very positive thing. And then, because that's kind of like, the sugar that's used to trap flies, or the flies that are used to trap spiders, or whatever it is. But it's, uh, okay, so William Benitez read Hubbard's The Fundamentals of Thought and was inspired to create a drug rehab program based on Hubbard's description of core human abilities, which he stole from a bunch of different sources. Benitez wrote to Hubbard from prison. Hubbard gave his blessing and Narconon was born. As time went on, various components were added to the program: the purification rundown, the sauna-based nutrition-based detox, objective processes that supposedly returned a person's attention to present time after drug use had knocked them about, the Way to Happiness book, a study of Hubbard's moral code, and some study of the principles contained in Scientology ethics. Intended to help the person disentangle themselves from the drug culture connections and behaviors. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't put this in there because I think I don't know how it would land with most readers, but in the Way to Happiness pamphlet that Hubbard penned, there's one of the precepts is to drink in moderation, right? So people at Narconon, they call them students, but they're the whatever, they're the patients or whatever. So the students were like, well, can I have a beer? It says, well, you gave me this book and it says drink in moderation. I mean, some of these people were alcoholics and they're being told by Narconon, oh, you can drink in moderation. They're being told by Hubbard because he didn't put in there, anything about having problems with alcohol. Okay, so while Scientology-based elements formed the bulk of the Narconon curriculum, it wasn't branded as Scientology. Miscavige wanted to throw the entire program out and create it newly from scratch. The first step was to expunge William Benitez as the original founder of Narconon. This guy's name was everywhere in the history of Narconon. They used to push him and this is the guy, and he was an inmate, and he started in prison to help people. And then when Miscavige decided to redo the program, he's like, nah, who is this guy? Nah, get him out of here. Because he was taking a little bit of the halo away from Hubbard. And so Miscavige needs Hubbard to be representative of everything because he set himself up as the person who's the most connected to Hubbard's ideals. So he needs to really pump up him as a kind of a god in a way. Miscavige wanted to throw the entire thing out. Okay, the first step was to expunge William Benitez as the original founder of Narconon. Miscavige wanted Narconon recredited as being, this is what they do, based on the discoveries of philosopher and humanitarian L. Ron Hubbard. So when they want to sell Scientology to the public, that's what to people that are not Scientologists, like they do this with their education stuff, that they're still failing to export to California schools. They say based on the discoveries of philosopher and humanitarian L. Ron Hubbard. And then you'll always find on the back of somewhere in the materials of, like the Way to Happiness or the Narconon materials that are essentially secular, it'll say property of L. Ron Hubbard Library. Now, L. Ron Hubbard Library is it's another name for the Church of Spiritual Technology, which is Scientology. So they're not really, uh, they're not really secular. It's not like they just give it to some other group, license some other group, and go away. It's them. Okay. So the other big change was to expunge the way to happiness from the Narconon program. Okay, maybe I explained the drinking thing. Yeah, as Miscavige explained it, one of the precepts in the way to happiness calls for individuals to be temperate. Apparently, Narconon clients, upon reading that precept, thought it meant they could take drugs and drink alcohol in moderation. Following our briefing, Gary Smith, the executive director of Narconon International, joined us. Gary was a rough-looking ex-addict who'd been a Narconon executive for a couple of decades, most notably running the Narconon Arrowhead flagship facility where Stacey Murphy had died. If Gary had been in the Sea Org, he most certainly would have been sent to the RPF. But as a public Narconon staff member, he would be spared the RPF and only subjected to months of brutal interrogations. Miscavige has briefed us as though Gary would be participating in the revamp, but I never saw him again in the year or so that I worked on getting the program redone. He was, as they say, disappeared. Yeah, like after that meeting, he was just told, oh, you have an appointment somewhere, and that we never saw Gary Smith again. The Narconon revamp was a huge deal in Scientology. New buildings for Narconon facilities on all major continents have been purchased, including actor Larry Hagman's Hilltop Mansion in Ojai, California, with the intention of turning it into a 5-star, celebrity-worthy luxury rehab. I don't think anybody has ever paid or gone to the Ojai rehab. I mean, it's, the house, I mean, it's spectacular. I think they can only handle maybe like 5 or 7 people at a time, but they didn't know how to market it. That was one of my big falling outs with them, was they didn't know how to, like, what to do with that. They didn't know, whatever. It doesn't matter now because, I'm glad we had that falling out. It helped me to extricate myself from all that nonsense. Massive renovations of all Narconon facilities were taking place. Every aspect of the program, from new policies to ensure Narconon was complying with the law, to uniforms to give the staff a polished professional look, to new study materials and films were being developed, documented, and put in place. The films were being produced to guide Narconon clientele as they progressed through the program. And of course, furloughs were banned. If a client left the facility before they had completed the program, they were not allowed to return, and they did not get their money back either. To further ensure against a repeat of the Stacey Murphy episode, a drug-sniffing dog was acquired for each facility. They happen to be beagles because beagles are pretty much the #1 drug-sniffing dog of choice. In Italy, that's all the police use. There's really cute pictures of Italian cops in those cute Italian cop uniforms with their little beagles. Beagles are very good at it. Once they get their mindset on something, I know this personally because it's very challenging walking my beagle when he sees a squirrel. It's really, you don't want to be caught off guard. I mean, he's good on the leash, but, they've been bred to chase things like squirrels. Okay, but for me, the good news was I'd be relocating to LA for the duration of the Narconon project and working out of ASI, which was like, oh my God, what a blessing. I don't have to go up to the international base anymore. I don't have to deal with all those people and all their stuff. And this is when I was really kind of processing my way out of the thing. But it takes a while. You don't just suddenly leave. I mean, people suddenly leave, but it takes a while to really get up to that point. The large office on the 4th floor of ASI was set up to accommodate about 10 people. It had a $1 million view of Hollywood Boulevard, looking out at the El Capitan Theater across the street. And that's where the Jimmy Kimmel Show is. And every once in a while they do like concerts on the street and stuff. So we could just walk over to the window and watch them. It's a cool place to work as a location and a space, not for any other reason. And it was only a few doors down from the famed Chinese Theater and the home of the Academy Award ceremony, the Dolby Theater, formerly named the Kodak. theater. Between tapings of Jimmy Kimmel Live Show and the El Cap, at the El Cap and premieres and awards shown at the Dolby, traffic could sometimes be a nightmare. But parking was never an issue at ASI because they had parking for about 200 cars and only needed space for about 30. Yeah, I mean, I used to go to movies like at Grauman's, and I'd call the receptionist in ASI and then tell them I wanted to park there, and they had no problem with it. So I always had like free parking on Hollywood Boulevard. I gave up a lot of perks when I left. So the office would do nicely for Timothy and me, a place to settle in and get to work on reconfiguring the Narconon program. The only drawback was that space was sometimes a thoroughfare for anyone needing to get to the other side of the floor or to the large office next to us that was currently occupied by Danny Sherman, the official L. Ron Hubbard biographer and Miscavige speechwriter, lapdog, and apologist. Working with Danny was the ever-present biographer's assistant, Fleur, sister of Lou Stuckenbrock, Miscavige's assistant paramour bulldog. It seemed like a daily occurrence, Miscavige popping his head into the office to say, "Danny's on his way up," at which point Timothy would quickly gather up his laptop and phone and scram. Danny hated Timothy and had no qualms about letting him know it right to his face in the most vulgar, toxic, venom-spewing manner you can imagine. It wasn't just that Danny hated Timothy. He hated the scripts Timothy wrote for event videos, most specifically the winners videos, the video presentations that preceded the announcement of IA's Freedom Medal winners. Yeah, he probably wrote the one for Tom Cruise. And he thought Timothy's work was amateurish. He also hated Amber O'Sullivan Meller. Remember that name? The CineSec at Gold, my former titular boss. In a fierce tirade, he once famously brandished a 38 special in her face. I think he hated her because she was a duplicitous sycophant who specialized in getting things done while pissing people off. She'd been busted out of RTC, where apparently she'd become an expert in the Miscavige style of management, which dictated that if your staff didn't fear you, then you were a lousy manager. This is a fact. You could get reprimanded if your staff liked you too much, because you would be accused of being worker-oriented and being popular. You needed to crack the whip in order to be acknowledged as a proper manager. It's just absolutely crazy. Amber was a petite. If I wasn't averse to body shaming, I'd refer to her as scrawny. Oh, I just did that, didn't I? Irish redhead who, while lacking in physical weight, threw the weight of her position around as though it had the girth of a sumo wrestler. Danny also hated Taron Lexton, a young director who had brought on to direct the Youth for Human Rights videos, as well as a feature-length film adaptation of Hubbard's book, The Way to Happiness, and other projects. He hated Taron because he thought his work was superficial eye candy that cheapened Scientology, all artifice and no art. That was the short list. In the previous few years, Danny had risen to new levels of toxicity. He seemed to have reached his zenith. This wasn't helped by and was probably a byproduct of his crippling arthritis, which he treated with any opioid he could get his hands on to the point of becoming severely addicted. This became one of Miscavige's most guarded secrets. The man he'd appointed to the exalted position of L. Ron Hubbard biographer was an opioid addict. In the midst of the national opioid crisis, while himself addicted to opioids, Danny Sherman was writing speeches extolling Scientology's role in helping to counter the drug problem and heal its victims. Scientology is unequivocally a bottomless pit of hypocrisy. Mostly, Danny hated all these people because they weren't what he considered cool. I wasn't on the list of those Danny hated. I was on the list of those people Danny considered cool. To Danny, I was one of the inventors of cool because I grew up in Laurel Canyon. I was an ex-surfer, ex-drug addict, and a filmmaker with a seemingly endless supply of film trivia and film history factoids at my fingertips. Sometimes you don't want certain people, you don't want them to think you're cool. And you're not trying to be cool. So it's like not, it's weird. It's just, I was originally good friends with Danny. And then over the years, he became more and more and more crazy. I became more and more disenchanted and disenfranchised with Scientology. And we were no longer friends. Plus, in all the years I knew him, I never knew that he'd been an agent for the old Guardian's office trying to set up, I think it was the Guardian's office, might have been Osa, I don't know. Trying, he did like he wore a wire and met Jerry Armstrong at Griffith Park, and he was acting like really like an agent. Okay, so oh, and I had lots of offbeat friends. I was always introducing him to quirky, thought-provoking books like David Rees's Must Read: How to Sharpen Pencils, which, by the way, if you've never, I'll put a link in the show notes, but the book, it is one of my favorite little short books to read if I'm in a bad mood. It's David Rees is an incredible humorist, and it's a great book of social observation and philosophy, and it's also incredibly funny and tongue-in-cheek. How to Sharpen Pencils. You can get it on Amazon, which for a while became Danny's raison d'etre. For those of you who don't speak French, that just means reason, his reason for living, like his main cause, like his thing. Like he was just, we just stopped talking about that book. I was like, I felt like, I wish I wouldn't have even turned him onto it. But because of that book, I became very expert at sharpening pencils, because now I really understand the relationship between your creativity and having a sharp lead. Okay, so I just read the book. So Danny was fond of saying, COB considers you and me to be the tent poles of Scientology. Danny wrote all of Miscavige's speeches, including the LRH bio speeches, featured at the annual March 13th event commemorating Hubbard's birthday. Miscavige would have Danny read the speeches to him out loud before he rehearsed them. After hearing Danny read one particular speech, he said, "Hey, Danny, you should go up on stage and give that speech." From then on, Danny became a presenter at every birthday event and an internationally known celebrity within the Scientology bubble. The L. Ron Hubbard biographer. Little did the public know that when Danny was spinning his tales of L. Ron Hubbard's daring do. Okay, 1 second. Give me a second here. Spinning tales of L. Ron Hubbard's daring to his heroism in battle or his spectacular achievements in the field of social reform and the arts, he was loaded on OxyContin and propped up with steroids. Danny had been one of my oldest friends, at least within a professional work context. I first met him shortly after arriving at Gold. We were the same age and had grown up in LA, me in West Hollywood, and he in the wealthy LA beach adjacent neighborhood of Pacific Palisades. I should say the unfortunately tragic, no longer burned to the ground neighborhood of Pacific Palisades. The term purple prose could have been invented to describe Danny's speechwriting style. It meets the definition according to Wikipedia. Purple prose is the flowery and ornate writing style that makes a piece of text impenetrable. It is characterized by long sentences, multi-syllabic words, excessive emotion, and a plethora of cliches. Like that is 100% his writing style. It's typically melodramatic and often too poetic. There has never been a more accurate definition of Danny's speechwriting style. He once told me he wrote that way to make Miscavige appear smarter than he was. Danny is so lucky that I was not a KR writing person, or I would have written him up for saying that. Dear Ethics, Dan Sherman claims that he writes to make David Miscavige look smarter. Anyway, just like so much treachery. It's just Machiavellian, that whole bunch of people. Okay. He was also a master at never letting the truth stand in the way of a good story. In one of his bio speeches, he referred to Hubbard as having been exiled from Rhodesia. So that's the thing where Hubbard was at St. Hill, and then he went to Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. He went there, he says, to run some kind of experiment to see if an OT could be effective on his own, whatever. He was hoping to go there and set up a base in cahoots with the government, but the government hated him anyway. So that he wrote in a speech that he was exiled from Rhodesia. After the event, I pointed out the inaccuracy. I said, Danny, he couldn't have been exiled. You can only be exiled from your native country. He was deported. To which he smugly replied, exile sounds better. This is like, he learned that from Miscavige. It's like, yeah, that doesn't sound good. Just use another word, So yeah, apparently L. Ron Hubbard was secretly a Rhodesian citizen. He actually said that he was Cecil Rhodes in a past life, who was the guy who founded Rhodesia, until he found out that Cecil Rhodes was a gay man, and then he was no longer Cecil Rhodes in a past life. So there we all were, me, Timothy, and Danny, on the fourth floor of ASI. Timothy and I working to revamp the Narconon program, and Danny writing speeches for Miscavige to give at international Scientology events. It was a vastly better scene than working at the Gold Base, 90 miles from home. ASI was a short 7-minute drive from where I lived, and I wasn't expected at the office until lunchtime. It was the first real sense of independence I'd felt in a long time. I'd been sprung from the cog and the machine grind you down routine of working at Gold, and was now working in Miscavige's rarefied bubble inside the belly of the beast. I would exercise in the morning, do whatever research was needed to prepare for the day's work, and then head to the office. Meanwhile, a few miles east of ASI at 4401 Sunset Boulevard, renovations on the church's new broadcast facility were approaching their final phase. The church had acquired the old KCE studio in 2011, a cultural landmark in Hollywood dating back to 1912. The property, spanning 4.5 acres, was home to a 300,000 square foot facility comprised of 2 sound stages, post-production facilities, offices, and a satellite uplink. Excuse me one second. In 1978, it was designated a Los Angeles Historic Cultural Monument. The perfect kind of trophy real estate Miscavige was so fond of purchasing, which he referred to as statement buildings. The Church of Scientology paid $45 million for the studio, and then spent an additional $50 million on renovations and upgrades. And also, they had a pretty big Sea Org workforce of all the staff that was going to be there, plus the people that are on the, well, we can't say RPF because it doesn't exist anymore, but they had a lot of workers that were oddly running everywhere around that facility. So yeah, they got some of the work that these guys made, who then ended up, they like stripped all the pointing out of all the brickwork, and then got that redone by some experts. They did the heavy labor, like stripping the metal, the old, like from the early teens, these beautiful metal window mullions, stripping them down and polishing the brass screws, and they would show it to you. They say, "Yeah, we did all this. We're really proud of it." This was just like mind-numbing work. So I know Miscavige had been looking to purchase a broadcast facility for some time, ever since a meeting a few years ago, when, randomly changing the subject, he said, "Hey, Mitch, I don't mean to push your buttons, but how'd you like to work with a bunch of young people? How'd you like to have a bunch of young people working under you?" Silently, I thought to myself how much I'd love to be working anywhere but Gold, and young people working under me, why not? He'd been looking at a facility north of LA in the Santa Clarita area, but that deal had fallen through, and he'd been grooming a bunch of recruits currently training at Flag to staff a new production facility. Yeah, these are like these people. If you want to know what they were like, especially the HCO department, the ethics people, look up the term Lebenssporn, which was a project that the SS ran during the Third Reich to breed the perfect Aryans. These guys were like Lebensborn. They were like unbelievable. They were just had the most lethal personalities. As long as I'd known him, Miscavige spoke of wanting to produce international events somewhere, anywhere other than Gold, which was originally established by Hubbard to be a film production facility, not a live event production facility. Miscavige wanted to keep film production running without interruption, yet producing live events at the same time as film production routinely threw the studio into chaos, resulting in film production being shut down. Put another way, Hubbard established Golden Era Productions to produce the films he deemed were vital to the survival and expansion of Scientology. David Miscavige turned Golden Era Productions into his personal vanity production studio, producing live events that would solidify him as the singularly unchallengeable leader of Scientology, and as a fundamental powerhouse, as a fundraising powerhouse. The events were a fundraising powerhouse. These two things did not play well together. As a result, when international events went into production, Gold would experience an extreme form of whiplash caused by film production being suddenly halted while everybody went on to producing all the graphic elements, music, documentaries, performance pieces, and speeches that went into putting on a 3+ hours long event. As I was not involved in event production, when an event hit the fan, I'd fade into the background, drift back to LA, and wait it out until film production started back up. And I'd enjoy my time off. After a time, I began to organize my entire life around times when gold was absorbed in the chaos of event production. I mean, everything, practically the birth of my kids, getting married, like everything you could imagine. Vacations would be like, well, there's an event, and I know they're going to shut down film production, so I'll get a little bit of time off. Okay, so in his search for a facility to house event production, Miscavige finally settled on the old KCET studios, home of LA's public television station. Per the church's press release, the new facility, the new facility would be a centralized, this is in quotes from the press release, centralized global communications hub for the church's media activities, which include public service announcement, television programming, advertisements, magazines, brochures, internet, and every other conceivable type of content. And that is all done at Scientology Media Productions. The new facility would be christened Scientology Media Productions. You'd think that having event production relocate from the international base to a new facility would be a cause for celebration at Gold and an end to the chaos and the whiplash effect. After all, the Gold staff would no longer be forced to put on the brakes and do a 180 turn 4 or 5 times a year, switching from film production to event production, which was like a weeks-long baton death march, and then back again to film production. But in reality, moving event production to a new facility represented an existential threat to Gold, as it made them appear less relevant, and they were freaking the F out. They were like, oh my God, these people whose lives had been ruined 4 or 5 times, that they just put through hell producing the events, when they didn't have to produce them anymore, they were like, oh my God, what are we going to do with all those, without all those crises? They were really like freaked out. Much of their identity and self-esteem had been derived from being the organization that produced the international events. And now that activity was being moved to a new studio. The word on the streets was that Gold was being left for dead. To make matters worse for Gold, Miscavige used Scientology Media Productions as another poison-tipped arrow in his quiver of emotional insults he loved to hurl at the Gold crew. I mean, he does this to a lot of people, but he was the reason that has not been any new staff at Gold for, I don't know, 20 years. The reason that the youngest staff member up there was in their 40s is because he's like, you guys are out ethics. If I bring new staff up here, you're just gonna, you're gonna corrupt them. Like that was his big excuse. Okay, so so here we go. I've been telling you for years if he want. Okay, so I lost my place here. Hold on. Yet when the KCT facility was purchased and Scientology Media Productions was in the planning stages, he told Gold staff that as a result of their monumental failures to produce live events without a crashing film production, they had forced him to buy another studio. Miscavige pointed at the new broadcast facility as a symbol of their failure to perform, and he guilted them with $100 million price tag for good measure. I mean, he literally just deflated all of the staff at Gold by saying, you want to know why I had to open this new state? He'd wanted to do it forever. Like from the day they started doing events, he was always saying, I got to get event of production out of Gold. I got to get it out of Gold, because it didn't mix. The two things didn't mix. And then when he finally does it, he blames the staff at Gold, because that's just like who he is. On Miscavige's invitation, Timothy and I took a tour of the new studio facility, which at the time was far from complete. The property had passed through many hands on its way to becoming the home of Scientology's broadcast facility. Its original industrial age brick structures, it's kind of like, there's some older buildings, some newer buildings, and then some buildings from the 70s. It was kind of developed over 3 kind of different decades. Its original industrial age brick structures dating back to 1912, combined with its 1970s administration building that had inspired by a post-war obsession with the modernist grid, was like touring an archaeological site dedicated to an epoch of Hollywood studio history. With the church's vast financial resources, of pennies on the hour workforce of skilled Sea Org labor, and a partnership with internationally renowned Gensler architects, the property could not have found a more attentive landlord than the Church of Scientology. The renovations were nothing short of spectacular. Even the Hollywood Reporter, which had never been kind to Scientology, described the new facility as plush. To give you an idea of the attention to detail, the surfaces of all the original brick were returned to factory new freshness. The next chapter is dedicated solely to Scientology Media Productions. I'll bring some photos up and we can see all these various different things. So they were returned to factory new freshness, given new mortar and damaged bricks, replaced with exact matches found by exhaustive searches of old demolished buildings. Missing doorknobs were replaced with the vintage originals. The original factory window mullions were stripped down to bare metal, and the brass hinge hardware polished to a gleaming shine. Restoring old buildings is something the Church of Scientology is expert at, and for good reason. Considering Hubbard's adage, "They will know us by our mess." That's mass, energy, space, and time. Scientology, euphemism for the physical universe. Miscavige is obsessed with purchasing old buildings and renovating them to such a degree that the renovations in and of themselves generate good press. Yeah, and also it's way cheaper than buying a building, tearing it down, building a new building, or buying a lot and building a new building. Is way cheaper to find an old building and renovate it. Especially when there's all this little picky little handwork like scraping paint off mullions, which is perfect for Sea Org staff to be doing. Okay. In his mind, the renovations alone command respect and prove to the world that Scientology is not a cult or a scam. Like he really believes this. Like, look at our building. What cult goes through all that trouble to take an old building and, of course, a cult that knows that as they renovate the building, it increases in value and adds to their assets. Okay, so he literally asked me this. Literally asked me what kind of a this is not conjecture. I heard this come out of his mouth. Even though the interior spaces and much of the hardscape had yet to be completed, I looked around and marveled that this was potentially my new home. It had not been decided if I'd be relocated to SMP or remain at Gold as the senior director of film production. Fingers were crossed I'd be moving to SMP, where not only would I have authority over a brand new creative venture, I'd have more autonomy than at Gold. But this is my mindset. I'm sharing with you where I was at when I was in there. So don't think this is like I'm celebrating any of this stuff now. This is what was going on in my mind. I'd be working 15 minutes from home, and maybe for the first time in many years, I could have a personal life outside of work. There was another advantage to working close to home. Okay, so this is can I keep going here? It's 3. Yeah, we can. I got a little more time. This is almost a good place to break, but I'm going to tell you this part. This is really interesting. There was another advantage to working close to home. My concern that the hepatitis I'd contracted at 17 might cause complications and need immediate medical attention. Being stuck at a Gold presented a very real problem. And this is like I was far from my doctor and the medical resource. Look, I had Hep C. I'd had it since I was 17. Very few people remain asymptomatic after 20 years, and your chances are 20%. You're going to 1 in 5. You're going to get end-stage liver disease. You're going to die. And it was, I was getting older and I still had Hep C and there was no cure I was willing to take, no treatment. And so I was a real concern for me being out of Gold because I was, I really needed the medical facilities out in Hemet are just horrific. They're horrible. They're just, they're almost like developing nation. So they're just not good. So there was another event. Okay, I concerned that the hepatitis I contracted at 17 might cause complications. Being stuck at a Gold presented a very real problem. I was far from my doctor, and the medical resources in the nearby town of Hemet were, in my experience, substandard. Even though I'd been asymptomatic since recovering from the virus decades prior, and I didn't drink or use drugs, that tended to weaken one's liver. My doctor cautioned me that end-stage liver disease came with little warning. And I quote, "You'll feel fine with no symptoms. 2 weeks later, you'll be dead." No matter how asymptomatic I'd been, just having the virus meant I had a 20% chance of developing liver failure. Gerald Duncan was the Director of Inspections and Reports, or DIR-INR. That's an ethics guy who walks around and tries to find people he can get in trouble. Uh, One of only 3 Black Sea Org members on the base. At about 6'1" and 300 plus pounds, he's a formidable figure, though his voice is only slightly higher than Michael Jackson's. The DIR is an enforcer within the ethics department. Gerald exhibited what I consider to be a bizarre behavior pattern that is trained into all ethics staff specifically, and into Scientologists in general, namely an artificial way of regarding people differently if they are in trouble or are doing well. For example, if you get a reject on something, you submit it to Miscavige and happen to pass by Gerald on your way somewhere, assuming he hadn't already gathered you up to go over your reject, he would glower at you, clench his jaw, shoot bullets out of his eyes, and muster up every item of body language he could in order to make you feel as ashamed as possible. Then, once you'd handled the reject and gotten a thank you or well done, etc., he'd be all smiles and thumbs up. Gerald grabbed me for an interview one day, wanting to know if I was doing everything possible to handle my health situation, adding that if I wasn't taking care of it, then I was being out ethics. I assumed the MLO, that's the medical liaison officer, who's an untrained, sometimes they'll have some nurse training, or may have, this one was a former registered nurse. But they're the ones that coordinate everybody's, medical stuff. And so, yeah, even mine, and I wasn't in the CR, although I had much more choice because I had my own insurance and I had my own doctors, but I still needed to coordinate with them. I assumed the MLO had sent him a report regarding my health issues. I explained my situation because I told him the treatments that were available, I wasn't going to do them because they were like only 60% success rate. They were really rough. They were like chemotherapy type stuff. Uh, I explained my situation with hepatitis C and that my doctor was strongly urging me to start interferon treatment. That's the one I wouldn't do. A chemo-like drug that involves giving yourself a weekly injection for about 12 weeks, usually on Friday night, then spending the weekend bedridden with flu-like symptoms. Most patients took a leave from work during treatment. Gerald was adamant that I start the treatment. When I told him that it would mean taking 12 weeks off work without skipping a beat, he replied, let's find an alternative solution. I mean, these people are shameless. He might as well have said, I'll take my chances that you'll drop dead before I'll okay you missing 12 weeks of production. I never did start the interferon treatment, not because of Gerald's reaction, but because I preferred to hold out for a better, less troublesome treatment. As I sat there looking at Gerald across the interview table, I felt pity for him. I gotta grab something here. Yeah, okay, so just gotta look at the time. Okay, I felt pity for him, pity for the conditioning that led him to think that way. If he was that disconnected from the humanity of others, how disconnected must he be from his own humanity? My doctor mentioned there was a new hepatitis treatment on the horizon that were there were new hepatitis treatments on the horizon that were 90% effective and had little or no side effects. I was working at ASI when I heard about the release of the new miracle drug Sovaldi. That's the one. Well, I think I'll explain it here. I called my doctor. Let's get you started, he said eagerly over the phone. Picking up my first prescription of Sovaldi from across the counter. This all ties back to Scientology. Uh, the pharmacist said that'll be $1,300. And that was for 1 week of a 12-week regimen. The blood left my face. Don't worry, she reassured me. You've just hit your copay. The next 11 weeks will only be $6 a week. Okay, so that's, if you do the math, that entire treatment for 12 weeks, I didn't need 16. I only needed 12. And you need to get a biopsy to determine whether they want to do 12 or 16. It's $84,000. This is the most successful drug in the history of big pharma in terms of the impact it had on people with hepatitis C, and also as a money-making drug, which they sell in developing nations like India. I think you can get it for like, 10 cents a pill or something. So And it's only going to get worse under the new administration when they start raising drug prices. Uh, but yeah, and then a lot of insurance companies were denying people because they weren't sick enough. The whole point of the treatment is to get rid of your hepatitis before you get sick. But insurance companies are like, nah, you don't have any symptoms, you can't have it. So, but I was very fortunate. I was an early person to get onto it. I had really wonderful doctors. So, okay, so the nurse provided me with with a number I could call 24/7 if any complications came up. There's a small chance your blood cell count will drop, and you'll need an emergency transfusion. It's rare, but it happens. There was more. It's not likely, but there's a chance you might have severe fits of anger and depression. So let your family and coworkers know to stay calm if that happens. Could you imagine working around Sea Org members, especially Miscavige, like you all of a sudden you're having these like mental. Some people, I mean, they had to go on to antidepressants to get through these drugs, and some didn't have much trouble with them. But could you imagine having an excusable angry outburst because you're on this medication and asking people to be patient, like those people to be patient with you? There's no freaking way. You're going to ethics. Uh, So let your family and coworkers know to stay calm if it happens. We can give you medication if you like. Which I of course turned down because I'm not going to take antidepressants under those circumstances. When I was in Scientology, when I arrived at work the next day, I informed Larice, Miscavige's assistant, that there might be days when I would not be able to come into work. She was completely understanding. 2 weeks after starting treatment, yeah, there's a little bubble where there's kind of they can be if they're in a good mood. There's a little bubble of niceness. Uh, I would not be able to come to work. She was completely understanding. 2 weeks after starting treatment, the virus had gone undetectable and my blood count had dropped slightly, causing a bit of fatigue. Other than that, I experienced no side effects, unless you consider wanting to beat someone to death with your bare hands to be a side effect. Okay, here's a story of that. The afternoon weekday traffic heading through Laurel Canyon feels like it moves at the speed of a mouse passing through the digestive tract of a boa constrictor. A lot of pressure and not much movement. I was headed over the hill to ASI when Timothy called. Our conversation distracted me from the traffic light at Lookout Mountain Drive, a stone's throw from the house Graham Nash shared with Joni Mitchell when he wrote Our House. Missing the red light, I almost gridlocked. Fortunately, the alert driver behind me left room for me to back up. To my right, a gentleman and his wife in a late model Mercedes began to turn left onto the Laurel Canyon, onto the canyon, passing in front of me. Apparently, I'd caused the guy a nanosecond delay while he waited for me to back up. And he had much to say about it. He rolled down his window and started screaming obscenities. Something about being inconvenienced by outsiders who used his neighborhood as a shortcut over the Hollywood Hills. His neighborhood. I'd grown up down the street and currently live less than a mile from that intersection. Not to mention, two of my best friends had died of heroin overdoses back in the day, within a few blocks of. And this guy screaming at me like I'm some punk kid from Queens who's clogging up the Midtown Tunnel to get to a disco on a Friday night. The Mercedes came to a stop. My window was down, and I'm screaming back at the guy. He's opening. I like this full blown medication side effect just kicked in, and I flew into a murderous rage. I'm screaming back at the guy. He's opening his door to get out of the car. The guy's wife's freaking out. They're all dressed up. They're on their way to a bed or something. And she's like, whoa. So this guy's about to get out of his car, and I'm about to get out of my car. And that really would have been ugly. I mean, we would have been like trying to kill each other in the middle of the intersection at Lookout Mountain and Laurel Canyon. So anyway, just then the light turns green. Okay, no. My hand is pulling the door latch. His wife is pulling him back into the car. Just then the light turns green and cars start honking at the guy to move. I hear Timothy's voice over my car's sound system. I'd forgotten all about the call. I literally wanted to beat that guy to death and would have done so given the chance. Maybe. But that was about the extent of the side effects I experienced from Sovaldi, other than being really tired some days and just not being able to go to work. Timothy and I were, and by the way, I was 100% cured, and I've been Hep C free since 2015, 16, I think it is. Timothy and I were having a good laugh, recalling the phone call when Miscavige walked in and asked, "What's that all about?" I explained what happened. He took a long beat and looked at me and said, "Did he deserve it?" He smiled and walked off, because that was kind of his, his barometer if violence was really necessary, if the other person deserved it. So a few weeks later, a group of us flew with Miscavige on Tom Cruise's jet to attend the IS event held yearly on the grounds of St. Hill in UK. I was in the middle of hepatitis treatment and so had to request extra medications in case the trip was extended, because they'd only give you a week at a time because it was so expensive. And even when you went to pick it up, you could only get it from the head pharmacist. And then because he was the only one with a combination to the lock where they kept it. I mean, there were people getting on that stuff and then selling it like they'd rather be sick and die because they needed the money so bad. Uh, okay. I spent the next week working on scripts for the Narconon program out of a comfortable office at St. Hill Manor with a beautiful view of the lush green English countryside. I was being waited on hand and foot, and it felt eerily like I was being groomed, but I was enjoying the experience too much to question it. So I tamped down those feelings and carried on. The yearly IAS event consists of the main event, followed by a couple of days of fundraising seminars. That is the main purpose for holding such events, to raise money. There is also the Patrons Ball, an exclusive event where Miscavige hands out gaudy trophies to top donors who earn status levels such as Patron of Legend, awarded to the Duggan family for having cumulatively donated 500 million. I'm sorry, 300 million. I think it's now up to 500 million. The patriarch of the family, biotech billionaire Bob Duggan, is Scientology's wealthiest member and ex-husband of Scientologist Trish Duggan. But the most exclusive event of the week is the Patrons Dinner, held in the opulent dining room at Hubbard's former residence, St. Hill Manor. I was invited to attend the dinner and sit at Miscavige's table, along with his assistant Lou, Tom Cruise, Australian pop star Kate Severano, and her husband Lee, Karen Alpers, head of the IAS, and Diana Hubbard. I'd forgotten that Kate Severano and Lisa Schroer, remember I called her Schroer here. That's inconsistent. Her maiden name is Allen, but at that point it was still Schroer. Gonna have to fire my editor. Anyway, yeah, so they'd grown up together in Melbourne, Australia, and their families were friends. And I'd forgotten that Kate and Lisa Shaw were my former assistant and disgraced commanding officer of Gold, currently being held captive in the hole, were close childhood friends, and that they had grown up together in the tight-knit Scientology community of Melbourne, Australia. Though I was unaware of Lisa's current whereabouts, I was aware she'd gotten into serious trouble and had vanished. Out of the blue, Kate asked me how Lisa was doing. I could literally hear Miscavige and Lou tense up in anticipation of how I might answer. They both knew exactly how she was doing, and that while being held captive in the hole, she'd taken a leadership position as head bondage mistress in Miscavige's torture circus, cheering on such gruesome punishments as Debbie Cook being made to stand in a trash can wearing a sign that read Lesbo, while ice cold water was poured over her. If you've read of or read about that gruesome episode, it was Lisa who placed the sign on Debbie Cook. There we were in this opulent setting that was once the home of L. Ron Hubbard, feasting on a meal prepared by caterers to the royal family. We were in the company of the biggest movie star in the world, surrounded by the most generous of all Scientology donors. And I'm being asked by a celebrity Scientologist about her friend, who David Miscavige, sitting 2 chairs to my left, was holding captive in hellish conditions and had personally traumatized. She's doing fine, I said. And in standard vernacular, and in the standard vernacular of all Scientologists use, especially Sea Org members, when asked about a person's situation that they can't be truthful about, I added, I haven't actually seen her in a while. She's been on a special project. And that special project, that's the euphemism, the inside euphemism. Miscavige and Lou started breathing again. Kate, satisfied with the answer, simply said, well, tell her I said hello if you do see her. And the conversation continued from there. And that was that. Bullet dodged. If I'd given the slightest indication of Lisa's actual predicament, I would have been toast. I willingly lived in a rarefied bubble, isolated from the worst aspects of Miscavige's bloody reign. And as such, I was obligated to support the lie that everything was fine. Keep in mind, I didn't know about the hole at this point. I didn't know where Lisa actually was. I had not lied. I had told an acceptable truth. I had not seen Lisa in a while, and she was on a special project. Yeah, the hole was a special project. The day before I left, Lou paid me a visit at my temporary office at St. Hill Manor. They were flying on to Dublin, then Denmark, and had come to say goodbye. Her message was simple: we'd like you to take on a broader role in the organization. This is when I really started to feel threatened, because those words, everybody I knew who had risen, I was just trying to make, I was up there to do a job and to make films. I wasn't trying to go take a broader role in the organization, because everybody I knew had done that. They were gone. They were toast. They were in prison. They were excommunicated. They were brutalized. So I'm like, so we'd like you to take a broader role in the organization. All I could think of was the people I'd known who, having been drawn closer and closer into Miscavige orbit, found themselves broken and defeated. I didn't want to end up in that pile. I didn't even want to think that such a pile existed, but I'd seen it happen to Sea Org members. I'd worked with two, I'd worked with who were busted to the galley or to the grounds, or the grounds crew trimming trees, or jumped the fence in the middle of the night with little or no money to their name and nowhere to go, or worse, were confined to the hole. Surely I thought it would be different for me, that I could continue to live my life at the top of Scientology unscathed, satisfied in the thought that if things got, the thought that if bad things were happening to people, they probably deserved it, or at least I was clever enough to avoid the same outcome. Nothing ever came of the conversation with Lou. I did end up being posted as the senior director at Scientology Media Productions, but I don't think that's what Lou was hinting at. I kind of do when I think back at it, because there was a huge kind of rift between Gold and S&P, because I went from, being their kind of daddy at Gold to being their creative daddy at S&P, and it was really, that tension is one of the things that led to me getting a ton of trouble and then going, just, I'm done. On the flight back, to LA, I couldn't help but reflect. Okay, hold on. Whatever it was, it got lost in the confusion of launching the new broadcast facility and ultimately forgotten. On the flight back to LA, I couldn't help but reflect on the relationship between Tom Cruise and David Miscavige. The dinner I attended with them that night at St. Hill Manor was the first time I'd actually seen them together in many years, though I'd often hear Miscavige refer to Tom, relating anecdotes about Tom's latest high-flying hijinks, or ordering a bunch of us into a conference room to be force-fed Tom's latest sizzle reel. Movies speak for hastily thrown together sequences from the latest Tom Cruise blockbuster that studios often put together to tease the press in order to generate advance buzz, a kind of insider sneak peek on a thumb drive. But it wasn't until the years had passed that I gained the advantage of distance. That I realized Tom and Dave are not friends. Tom is Dave's highest profile victim. Here is a man who came to Scientology as in a vulnerable state, a budding star with a reading disorder, and made it painful for him to read scripts. Somehow his interaction with Scientology had afforded him the means to lick that problem. Not that unbelievable to me as it had afforded me the means to kick a drug habit, but Cruise's interaction with Scientology and his friendship with Miscavige would also see the destruction of Tom's 3 marriages. The first to Scientologist Mimi Rogers was literally engineered out of existence by David Miscavige's personal operatives to make way for his second wife, Nicole Kidman, with whom he adopted 2 children. When Nicole's lack of enthusiasm for Scientology met Miscavige's paranoia that he might be a potential threat to Tom, making Scientology the most important thing in his life, Miscavige had that marriage killed off as well. They say 3 is a charm. And when Tom jumped on Oprah Winfrey's couch, as silly and manic as that may have seemed, no one questioned that he was in love with Katie Holmes. Their dream wedding in an Italian castle was called the wedding of the century, but it was also a portent of the disaster to come. Ex-captain of the Apollo, Norman Starkey, made a stir when he allegedly hit on Brooke Shields, earning himself a stint in Miscavige's makeshift prison, the notorious hole. But the big news was Leah Remini noticing Miscavige's assistant Larisse playing grab ass with her boss, and then asking foot-in-mouth spokesperson Tommy Davis why Dave's wife Shelley wasn't at the wedding. Tommy's answer: You don't have the fucking rank to ask that, was the trigger point that led Leah to exiting Scientology and becoming its most outspoken and effective critic. That I deduced that. I wasn't there at the wedding, but I deduced that from reading Leah's book. I hadn't spoken with Leah since we were both in Scientology. It was a long time ago. Nearly 6 years later, Katie Holmes discovered she was as married to Miscavige as she was to Cruz and made her dramatic escape. When I hear and there was also the fear that her child was going to end up in the sewer someday. When I hear statements that Tom Cruise is David Miscavige's co-conspirator or his best friend and that they have some special bromance, I wince. When you survey the wreckage of Tom's personal life, when you consider that all three of his ex-wives have been declared enemies of the church, that he's estranged from his only natural child, that his two adopted children are estranged from their adopted mother and are deeply committed to a cult, and when you calculate the tens of millions he's donated to Scientology, there is only one conclusion to be made. Tom Cruise is David Miscavige's number one victim. But that does not mean he isn't accountable for his participation in allegedly mistreating his staff and accepting free labor from Sea Org members, or his role in Girlfriend Gate, wherein church resources were used to audition a girlfriend for Tom after his pre-Katie Holmes romantic partner, Penelope Cruz, abruptly ended their relationship, and Tom complained he couldn't get a girlfriend. That role was awarded to actress Nazanin Boniati, who, not understanding the arcane rules and rituals of Tom and Dave's relationship, was kicked to the curb and made to do penance by scrubbing a bathroom floor with a toothbrush. She too left Scientology and is now considered an enemy of the church. Okay, good. So we're going to stop there. There's a bunch more. It's a really long chapter. We're done with that part. Next, we're going to go back to Narconon and deal with all that stuff. So I'm going to do we're going to do comments now. Let me just get rid of this. Okay, guys, good. Welcome back. Okay, let me just go back here and do some comments while I have time. Now, this is interesting. Blowtrill says, I did not know this. Thank you for bringing this up. Blowtrill says that he did a bunch of those missions to establish Able Int. That building is owned by CST. Is it still owned by CST? I mean, that actually makes a lot of sense. But I never knew that. I figured it was just another property owned. But I guess it couldn't be owned. Wow, that's weird. Like it's a for-profit, but owned by a nonprofit. It's very strange. And I missed this. Blowdrill said, good afternoon, Mitch. Hope I am. I'm very well. Thank you very much. Okay. Brown Command National. Brown Nationalist. Okay, cool. I graduated from Narconon in 2010, currently in treason after blowing as a staff member. Congratulations. My light here is screwed up. I never noticed that. Sorry about that. Congratulations to Brown Nationalist. I don't know how to pronounce that. Yeah, congratulations for achieving the condition of treason for blowing as a staff member. Okay. Huh. Interesting. This paralyzed to paralyze makes. We were talking about Hubbard's science fiction earlier, and he says Hubbard's covert OWs, meaning overts and withholds, aka the Mission Earth series. The overts and withholds. These are the things that you don't want people to know about, things that you're withholding, or things that you did that you were bad. And yeah, there's what he's referring to is in the book Mission Earth. There's just a lot of weird, perverted. It's a very anti-trans. There's a character who accidentally has a sexual encounter with a trans person unwittingly, and there's all kinds of hate. It's just so full of. So basically, he's saying that the book is really Hubbard's confession, which I'm sure to some degree, if it's not his confession, it's what he imagines he wishes his life were like. Okay, good. Okay, so here's a question from Dreamscape. So Bridge Publications. Okay, good question. Okay, so Bridge produces, they actually print and are responsible for the publishing of all of the Hubbard books that are part of Dianetics and Scientology. And then Author Services is responsible for all of the books that the fiction books, the dime novels and all that crazy stuff, the science fiction books. So that's the difference. But I'm trying to think. I believe they print. Bridge is like this state of the art print on demand facility that's actually quite robust in its functionality. But I wonder. I actually can't I can't remember if Bridge prints the fiction books, because how could they do that? It's just crazy, because I don't know how they mix. The Mormons do it. The Mormon church owns tons of property, way more than Scientology, and has $300 billion to Scientology's $3 billion. But they have both for-profit and non-profit, and they're very good at not mixing them. I mean, they own the ZCMI Center, which is like the biggest shopping mall in Salt Lake City. I only know that because my father was an architect and he actually worked on that project. And I remember him coming back from Salt Lake City one day and from an initial meeting with these Mormon people who were, paying for the ZCMI Center. And he was like, they pay cash. They like every project he'd ever been involved with, they're like bank loans and, construction companies that the financing on them is complex, but he was like, no, the Mormons, and it's kind of like Scientology, except Scientology, well, I guess the Mormons do too. They get their parishioners to pay for everything. Yeah, so that's right. Paralyzes Bridge prints of Scientology. So, and they also work on, they do some work on the Preservation Project, some of the stuff there for stamping records and shit. Some of it's there. Let me see, what else do we got? Blowdrill says, I really liked the Mission Earth series right up to volume 7. I read the first volume and I was like, I couldn't go past there. I thought the writing was just so horrible. And I'd read a lot of science fiction, and this is Blowdrill again. Terry took over EDASI when DM moved to RTC. Terry. The EDASI is, I can't think of her name. The only one that I knew other than, oh God, I can't think of her name. She's Austrian or German. Gundilf. Gundilf. Oh, I can't think of her last name. Anyway, so I don't know who Terry. I'm sure if you give me the last name, I'll know who you're talking about. Okay, Blowdrill, who's always full of, Terry took over EDSI and then, okay, right? Okay, good. I want to do this one. Int and CST both had motor pool. Okay, cool. So I guess they shared their transportation facilities. Oh, okay. Now we're talking about motor pool. Okay, so Blowdrill says when Honda was the car of choice, the CO would have a car and the staff could check out a lower trim level Honda when they needed to go to INT or LA. Oh, so this was at CST, I guess, where you were posted, Blowdrill. Yeah, I know, because when I was there, they bought a whole ton of cars. They actually switched to Fords because they had this great deal. There's a company in town. They specialize in selling fleets to the motion picture studios, and the Scientology had made a deal with them to buy a bunch of cars, and they just bought a boatload of Fords. Okay, good. So what else we got? Yeah, okay, this is a whole thing. I didn't get into this. Adam Carmona says ASI was charged with making back all the money Dave lost on oil wells. Yeah. So uh, reportedly, Miscavige invested a ton of money, uh, Scientology money that he was under his control, invested, made some really bad investments and lost some incredible amount of money. And that's when they started fundraising in earnest for the preservation project as a way of him getting that money back. I think I answered this one before about Tony Hoban's. Didn't the one in Georgia get shut down around the same time? I really don't know. That could be, but I wasn't paying attention to that. What is this? Michael Harper says NASA had. Sorry, I keep going off mic. Sorry about that. I'm still learning this stuff. Remember, I'm a behind the camera guy. NASA had radioactive beagles. Wow, that's cool. I'm not sure what that means. They were okay. Now, Stana says, I wonder if Narconon would come close to getting accreditation through Joint Commission or other residential treatment accreditation. Okay, so let me just tell you what I know about that. When we were doing the Narconon program, and because it was in the heels of all these legal problems, and because Miscavige wanted to, what's the word? He wanted to proof, as I guess you could say that, or he wanted to bolster the legal structure of Narconon so as to avoid lawsuits, because lawsuits, some lawsuits, the tort law in America is crazy. I remember hearing about like some guy who stuck his hand in a blender and chopped his fingers off and won a lawsuit because nowhere on the blender or in the instructions did it say, don't put your fingers on the blade. So you get sued. You have to tell people not to do stupid shit. Um, but here's the deal. So let me put this back up here. So while we were working on that, there was this attorney who came on board. He was a really good guy. He worked in the drug rehab and medical services sector. So if you were setting up some kind of healthcare or drug rehab, which is in that same space, he would then legally make sure you had all of your credentials and all of your ducks in a row. And you weren't. So they hired this guy who wrote a lot of the legal policy for Narconon. And one of the things he said, and I remember very specifically, I was in the meeting where he said, look, you guys are claiming an 80% success rate, which is what Narconon would do. In reality, about very few of the people who start a Narconon program finished it. And of the ones who finished, a year later, 80% of those were drug-free. But that's a really teeny number. That's not what they were lying and saying, that they had an 80% success rate. And so this lawyer said, you have to stop saying that. You cannot say that. You're going to get sued. The only way you can say that is you have to do what are called peer review studies. You have to have independent organizations come in, monitor the outcomes, do a report. And if you can do that in a peer reviewed study, then you can legally say what it is. Of course, that was just utterly disregarded. But yeah, so they could actually, if they had got peer review studies done, then they could show those to joint commissions or other residential treatment accreditation boards, because they would go a long way. But they can't do peer reviewed studies because the whole thing's a joke. Yeah, so here you go. So yeah, Tony Hoban says people go poof into thin air a lot. Yeah, it's weird because when up at the international base, and I'm sure that Blow Drill knows all about this, that people would be sent off on missions. Like he was on these missions he mentioned to establish Able, and sometimes there'd be no advance notice. They'd get their orders and they'd fire off in the middle of the night, and then nobody would really notice it. A couple of people would know, but everybody's so busy. So you're kind of used to people just going, like when Shelley Miscavige disappeared, I thought, oh, she's probably away doing something. And then I ran into her accidentally like a couple of years after she disappeared, and it still didn't seem weird. And where I ran into her was just a short drive from the Big Bear CST complex. And we had a nice chat, and that was that. And then I found out a few years later that she'd been disappeared. And I was like, wow, no wonder her and the 3 handlers she was with, who I knew all of them, they were kind of nervous when I showed up. They're like, oh, what are you doing here? So I'm like, I'm having lunch just like you. It was in Redlands, California, which is if you drive out of the CST base, and this is in the book, so I'm probably going to repeat it. But if you drive from the CST base in Big Bear and you drive down a civilization, the first place you're going to come to is Redlands, which is a good place to shop and eat and see the doctor and stuff like that. Yeah, Tony Hoban said sight and scent hounds. Yeah, they are. They are beagles are sight and scent hounds. They're in that class of dog, and their noses are. I think it's 200,000 times the smell ability of a human. I can't imagine. That would drive me crazy. My dog smells everything. It's nuts. And Paralyzed says, no wonder those speeches meander like they do. Oxy and foods, good times. Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he was out of control. I mean, it was like I didn't even begin to describe just the level of the kind of mad outbreaks that Dan Sherman would have. And the thing with the gun, he used to carry this gun around all the time. He was into guns and switchblades. He always had a switchblade on him, and he always often carried this little 38. I think Miscavige gave it to him. He loved this, and I don't know if it was loaded or not, but he just pulled this thing out and stuck it in Amber's face one day and just started screaming at her, and just like, I mean, people were afraid of him. Danny was not a big guy, but like literally, Sea Org staff were like afraid of him because he could write in 2 weeks. He could write a 3-hour event. And they would make millions off that event. So he could, yeah, no, I get it. Roy, I say, yeah, Royd's not food. Yeah, that makes sense. Never knew that. Paralyzed to paralyzed. Xenu means yours in Swahili. Yeah, Chuck Beatty said, "Hey Chuck, nice to see you. Thanks for stopping by." His question is, so you worked at ASI when working on non-church? Yep, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to get to how crazy that is. It even gets crazier than that, because there's um, and I've made myself available to testify if this ever gets investigated, because I am positive that they're messing around with their tax exempt requirements, because I'm essentially working for the Church of Scientology International at Gold, but I'm sort of like, I guess they could have said I was volunteering at ASI or something, but then why was I being paid? Yeah, it's definitely and then Chuck Beatty also commented that, hold on. Oh, I lost my place. Hold on, hold on. There you go. Okay, so Chuck says non-church work you did at ASI, kind of the COS separation from the public LRH products put out from ASI. Kind of the Church of Scientology separation from the public LRH products. But yeah. Yeah, so yeah, it's like I don't know what the deal is with how that would violate it, but it just felt really weird because ASI is a for-profit corporation. And Chuck would like to know, was there a pyramid at ASI in your interaction? It used to be Hugh Wilhare, brother of Greg, but I think Hugh somehow either passed or is gone. No, Hugh Wilhare, by the time I worked at ASI, I'd done stuff before I worked for Gold. I did a music video for them for the Mission Earth They did an album, Mission Earth album. It's really ridiculous. It's on YouTube. It's Johnny Winter. It's called Cry Out. You can look at it. But yeah, no, I know Hugh well here. He's developed some kind of like palsy or neurological disorder. I don't know if he's passed away, but he's shaken pretty badly. But he was up at it or somewhere, I don't know, because he wasn't during this time in 2015, 16, 17, he was no longer at ASI. Yeah, Chuck, that's right. Yeah, ASI, yes, fiction, non-church, where Bridge Publications does church materials. Chuck has another question. Was Al Koch still at ASI in your time there? No. And yeah, thank you. It's Gunhild Jacobs is the EDASI. Her former husband, Larry Jacobs, was a notorious SA abuser. He was a cameraman who traveled around with camera crews making fake documentaries, and then a number of staff members were assaulted by him, and it was covered up. But yeah, Gunhild, she was kind of like, yeah, she was the ED of ASI, which was like, it's like ASI is like, they do book fairs and they do all this like marketing of the books. And then at the center of it, you have Dave and Lou working out of there to do all their nasty stuff while in the midst of this sort of very benign seeming organization. So Astana says, my brother is an architect and worked for Gensler. I asked him if he was involved in the renovation of that building. Oh yeah, cool. Yeah, so if it was all done out of the Gensler Santa Monica office, and it was done under the direction of the one of the principals at Gensler LA, a guy by the name of Irwin Miller. I couldn't think of his name the other day. But yeah, you should ask him. Report back, please. So Chuck says that I was ASI staff 1992 to 95. Yeah, that was before I did anything for them. The thing I did for them, oh no, that's actually not true. I did the music video with Edgar Winter in like the late 80s because I went to work for Gold in 1990. So it would have predated your time there. I didn't do anything with them during that time. Okay, Buckwheat says, I believe blow drill means Tiragumbo. Okay, right. That makes sense. Those whole bunch of people are like not people that I never knew or interacted with, but I know who that person is. So here's another one from Chuck. Question, important question. Mitch, did you ever get from Miscavige that he considered himself still COB ASI? Because as of 1995, when I left ASI, there were 2 logons into ASI computer. Okay, so I guess the logon remained after. No, he was COB-RTC. He was never, he dropped that. I never heard anything about him being chairman of the board. Once he took over RTC, I never went, when I was there, at least working with him at ASI, never heard anything about that. He was still referred to as in exactly the same way. And so I think he just dropped that whole thing. I think that was just the springboard once he became the chairman of the board of the Religious Technology Center, or the clown car known as the Religious Technology Center, that I think he gave up the whole ASI thing. So Chuck says Miscavige had COB ASI logon, and Shelley has COB assistant logon still, even though they'd moved on to RTC years prior. Yeah, that makes sense because their computer department is a disaster anyway. And why remove the logon? Maybe he had some reason to want to log on as a different identity. Who knows? But okay, Tony Hoban says, I looked up the Georgia Narconon a few minutes ago because I remember the news coverage. It said they closed down in 2013 for insurance fraud. There you go. So thank you very much for that. I was not aware of that, but I would have been that, I wasn't, I, I didn't have the same restrictions from the internet or other stuff as staff members and Sea Org members, but still, I wasn't looking around for bad news about the Church of Scientology. I wouldn't even have known that unless it was like some huge news. This is Matthias Bart. No, Mitch, you have to design a machine so that can only be switched on when the operator had both hands out of the danger area. Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's true of some things, but not blenders. But there's been a lot of crazy tort lawsuits. But, my only point is that they never said, and this is, Narconon never said, "Hey, you can't bring drugs in here." They sort of assumed it, and then that gets you in trouble. So you have to put in your little indoctrination book, if you bring drugs into this facility, you will be dismissed from the program and you won't get your money back. And then if somebody manages to sneak drugs in and they die, they'll be held harmless because they did what they could do. Uh, And this is Ryan M. Hi, Mitch. I'm super late, but I barely made the live. I really wished you would have spread them out a little more, but still, I am grateful to hear your insights. Yeah, I just wanting to get this done because I have a bunch of other content I want to do, and it's hard for me to do more than one of these a day. But they're there for, but I appreciate that feedback. If anybody has any feedback about when or how frequent they would like these, please put a note in the chat. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad you're here. And I really appreciate that comment. You're very welcome. And yeah, thank you. Peter Anderson said, "Did you ever send a copy of your book to U.S. House Representative Jamie Raskins?" No, but thank you for bringing that up. I will do that. I have written multiple times to Brad Sherman, who's my congressperson in Washington. I strongly suggest everybody does that. Like, here's the deal: the thing that's going to take Scientology down is losing their tax exempt status. How do they lose it? They lose it because they refuse to follow public policy. Public policy is, you can't be a bigoted, racist, anti-LGBTQIA plus. You can't coerce your employees to terminate pregnancies because you're concerned that it'll interfere with their ability to work. There's a lot of things that you can't, open up credit card accounts for people who haven't given you all these things that they do. They violate public policy. And that's what Congress needs to be hammered on. Like, this group refuses to follow public policy. It's not that they're, doing this or that, or they got abusing kids, or they're doing, human trafficking, or all. It's all under the guise of they do not follow public policy. So when you do write to a representative, that's the angle you take. And you can Google public policy and then kind of construe your own stuff out of that and just write a letter. I know you hear a lot of people saying, you hear a lot of people talking about, I had one person in this quote unquote, community, which is struggling to be a movement at the moment. I had one person say, well, you went to the FBI and nothing happened. And I'm like, okay. Like it's all up to me. But they're building a case. It takes a long time. They keep records. But and then the other thing is you keep hearing this a lot. The FBI, there's FBI. Like, people love to use the word FBI, but 90% of the crimes that Scientology commits are not federal, they're state. Like, I spoke with the agents about an essay that took place abroad. Somebody came to me and they're like, I really need your help. What do I do? And I said, right now you walk into a police station and you report it. But I'm in another state, not even where I live. I said, it doesn't matter. She said, but it happened in another country. I said, it doesn't matter. The police have to take the report, and then at least it's on record. Next day, she walked into a police station, and they were like, okay, but they took the report. So it's really important to keep it, like the Danny Masterson, his crimes were not federal. I had nothing to do with the FBI. So it's really important to not bypass the other authorities. And it's really important to write your state assemblyman, your city council, like everybody you possibly can, from the angle of this organization does not follow public policy. Okay, but that's a really good suggestion. Peter, that's a great suggestion. I'm going to do that. I'm going to order some more. I'm going to sign one to him, and specifically because he is really, the first lawmaker in Washington that has come out and like just brutalized Scientology, mentioned how horrible they are. Okay, so Professor Kakan says, comment, leftover logons equals out security, but who the F cares? Yeah, totally. Especially like if it's Miscavige, somebody's going to go, oh, sir, that's out security. Okay, so Professor Kakan says, comment, good to see you back. We all have our logistics to deal with. Yes, we do. I pull these up. I don't read them first, so it could be anything. Sabine, hi, Mitch. Do you have family in Scientology? Have they left before or after you? They all left before me, and I'm glad about that, but I'm also a little ashamed of it. Yeah, my former wife left around the Debbie Cook fiasco. And my two kids were sort of early teens. They were both out. I think my older son was like 16. I tell you an interesting, I'm just going to make a comment. Watching my kids grow up in Scientology, we weren't hardcore. My kids went to Scientology schools for a lot of their upbringing, schools that are run by Scientologists. And then as they got into middle school and high school, my former wife and I were like, you know what? If we keep these kids so isolated and insulated, they're never going to know how to talk to anybody but other Scientologists. So we put them in public schools. And that went really, really well. My younger son ended up going to LACHSA, which is the Los Angeles, it's the Los Angeles High School of Performing Arts. He was like the first student to graduate from their newly formed cinematic arts program. He's, today he's doing very well. He's in post-production. He's working on a big Hollywood film and blah, blah, blah. My other son's a very talented musician. He went to another high school that was kind of arts-centric. So we didn't go through all that kind of stuff with our kids. But my observation was watching them and watching their interaction with Scientology, that even while I was like, Scientology is not going to survive this next generation. Like, it's not, because they don't like it. They really have a problem with it. Yeah, so here's a comment. Jamie Raskins was on the House Oversight Committee last term, where he could have brought the IRS, FBI in and questioned them about enforcing the law. He's moved on to the Judiciary Committee this term. Thank you very much for that. Well, it's only going to be more difficult now that we have this new administration, because Pam Bondi's probably going to get confirmed. She's a big ally of Scientology. She's probably the reason that Scientology stayed out of trouble in Florida, because she was the Attorney General in Florida. Okay, guys, so that brings me to the end of these. Professor Kakan lets us know that he's late, but that he did get the notification. Great, thanks for letting me know. And we'll also go back and watch the entire episode. Okay, so I'm going to come back tomorrow, just a warning, and I'll do the rest of this chapter because it gets really, really good. Right now, I got to run because some people are expecting me to celebrate a very special person's birthday. And so I'll see you guys soon. And please, thank you so much for coming by and for your support. Hey guys, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps with the algorithm so that videos like this can reach a broader audience. And be sure to hit that notification bell so that you'll be informed when new videos drop. For additional ways to support this channel, please click on the link tree on the Scientology The Big Lie channel page. This work is only made possible with your support. Thank you.